Okay, today we are going to be adding and subtracting our rational expressions, and hopefully this is where doing those bell works in last unit are going to pay off and helping us to find our common denominator and to reduce our fractions. So let's go ahead and get started. So first ones are pretty easy. Um, when we add our rational expressions, we have to have a common denominator. So the only difference between our bell works and what we're doing now is that our fractions are going to have a lot more variables in the denominator. The bell work, we kept it mostly to numbers, trying to get the lowest common denominator, but now we're going to have variables that we're going to have to keep track of. So when I look at this one, x over x plus 4 plus 3 over x plus 4, it looks like to me, I put little grouping symbols around these. The x plus 4s are the same factor. So these already have the same denominator. So if they have the same denominator, we'll just go ahead and add the x plus 3 and put it over the common denominator. The common denominator, the lowest common denominator is x plus 4. When you add fractions, remember, once you figure out what your lowest common denominator is, you add everything in the numerator over what the lowest common denominator is. You don't add the denominators, you just add the numerators. Okay, so on this next one, I notice a negative sign, and we talked a lot about this in the bell work. We want to take care of that first, so I'm going to move that up to a negative x. Once again, I see that these two are the same grouping, x minus 2 and x minus 2. That means the lowest common denominator is x minus 2. The denominators have to be the same. All right, so if my lowest common denominator is x minus 2, then that means I'm going to take my 3x and I'm going to add to it my negative x. And we're going to end up with 2x over x minus 2. And once again, we're done. We've got a subtraction sign on the bottom, so we can't cross the x's out or the 2. Okay, this third one, it says be sure to simplify your answer. So what is that talking about? Well, I'm going to take care of that negative sign first. I notice that this factor, this quadratic is the same as this quadratic. So it looks like I already have a lowest common denominator. So that means we're going to go x plus 4 minus 1 over x squared plus 2x minus 3. Okay, that's going to turn out to be x plus 3 over x squared plus 2x minus 3. Okay, remember we have to make sure that we can't factor and reduce. So in last chapter when we had or last section when we had a problem like this, you had to check and see, will it reduce? This factors to x plus 3 and x minus 1. So that's why it's giving you the hint. Make sure that you check to see if it will reduce. And it does. This x plus 3 is the same as that x plus 3. Now, we're only left with an x minus 1 in the denominator, so that means we've got to make sure we put our 1 in the numerator to show that it's a fraction still. We don't just write x minus 1. It's in the denominator, so you got to write 1 over x minus 1. Okay, so here we go. Now we're going to do something where they are unlike denominators. So we've got to figure out what the lowest common denominator is. I kind of have a system that when I'm trying to figure out a lowest common denominator, I kind of look at numbers by themselves first. So I just do numbers. Then I do variables, just single variables. So if I have any single variables, so that would be like an x or an x squared, and then, or an x to the third, whatever, just something. I do variables next. And then the last thing I do are parentheses. Okay, so then I check my parentheses. So if you're looking for a lowest common denominator, the goal is to get the denominators to look the same. You need to have all the different factors. So if I were to add this one, I've got 1/6 plus 2x plus 1 over 3x. I kind of look at this as two separate things. This is 3 times x. It's not, 3x doesn't have to stay together. It's 3 times x. So in my little checkoff list, when I'm trying to figure out my lowest common denominator, first thing I do is just look at numbers. We did that in the bell work. If you have a 6 on the bottom, so like if I had 1/6 plus 1/3, What would be the lowest common denominator between the 1/6 and the 1/3? Well, it would be a 6. We'd have to have the 6. It would be 1/6. It would be the 6th. Okay, so now we've got that for the numbers, so I don't worry about them anymore. And now I go and look for variables, random variables. Well, I have one right here. I have an x. So that needs to be part of my lowest common denominator. I need to have all those different factors so that I can make the denominators the same. So I want them to look the same. So remember how we did that on the bell work? We multiplied by 1. So for this one, I'm going to put parentheses around here so we know that's grouped together. If I want right here, this piece right here to be a 6x on the bottom, because that's my lowest common denominator, I'm going to have to multiply that piece by 2. 3x times 2 is 6x. Okay, over here on this other fraction, what am I going to have to multiply if I want the denominator to be a 6x? An x. I'm missing an x. Okay, so what am I left with? I've got 1x. We don't need to write the 1, but I'm going to write it so you can see where I'm getting these numbers. Plus, and then this 2 is going to distribute to those two terms. So plus 4x plus 2 over, well, maybe I'll put my common denominator here first so you can see the two pieces like that. Okay, since the denominators are the same, then we can write them all over the same denominator. And we end up with 1x plus 4x plus 2, so that's 5x plus 2. That's our answer. So the goal is, just like we did in the bell work, we're trying to get the denominators to look the same. And how do we do that? By multiplying by 1. And how do we get our 1? Well, we have to figure out what is missing from the denominator to make it match our lowest common denominator. Okay, so this one right here, first of all, I notice this negative sign, so I'm going to distribute it there. And then I'm going to look at my factors. Now, the one thing that we have to understand is when we're getting a lowest common denominator, we can only do that by multiplication. So a very common mistake is that students look at this x minus 5 and they say, oh, well, we'll just minus 5 like this. Okay, that's not true. We have to multiply in order to get our denominators to look the same. We're only allowed to multiply by 1. We're only allowed to multiply by something in the parentheses, okay? So we're only allowed to multiply. All right, so how are we going to do that? So remember my little check-off list? I look for numbers first, and I don't see any number factors. I count x minus 5. There's no parentheses there, but it is a grouping. So if you want to put it as a grouping, you can put parentheses around it. So I don't see any numbers. So then I move to lone variables. I see a lone variable right here. That's an x. So I need that in my lowest common denominator. And then I move to parentheses, and I see a x minus 5. So I need that in my lowest common denominator. Remember, we're trying to get the denominators to look the same. So let me come down here and write this again. So plus, okay, I have decided that this is my lowest common denominator, x times x minus 5. So when I come over here and look at my fraction, this piece right here is going to have to multiply by x minus 5 because that's the piece I'm missing, right? I've got the x, but not the x minus 5. So then what are we going to have to do in the top? The same thing. So if I multiply the bottom by x minus 5, I have to multiply the top, remember, because we're multiplying by 1. That's 1. Okay, over here on this side, this piece already has the x minus 5, but it's missing the x. So if I'm going to multiply the bottom by the x, then I have to multiply the top by the x. All right, so let's go ahead and work that out. Distributive property here. So 3x minus 15 over x times x minus 5 plus a negative 2x times x and x minus 5. Now, you could probably get to where you're going to skip this middle step, and you're just probably going to go from here to the answer. My denominators are the same, so 3x minus 2x is x minus 15 over x times x minus 5. Okay, let's try another one. So this one right here, I'm going to make this a negative 2 over 1. And I'm going to put this as a grouping, so I call that as my parentheses. So now we got to figure out what our lowest common denominator is. So remember my pattern. I always check for numbers, lone variables, and then parentheses. We got to have all those in our lowest common denominator. Okay, so it looks like to me the only number I see in the denominator is a 1. So we don't need to write that, but I'll put it just so you can see what I'm doing. And then I don't have any lone variables because the only thing I have on the left-hand side is a parenthesis, x plus 4. So it looks like to me then our lowest common denominator is x plus 4. So we need to get these two denominators to look the same. This denominator and this denominator need to look the same. So x plus 4 on the left is okay. It's already x plus 4. But this one on the right is going to need to multiply by x plus 4. So remember, whatever you do at the bottom, you have to do the top. So now I've got 7 over x plus 4 plus a negative 2 over times the x plus 4 over x plus 4. Okay, distributive property, I'm going to have 7 minus 2x minus 8, and they're both over x plus 4. So combining my like terms, my final answer is negative 1, subtract 2x over x plus 4. Okay, here we go, the next one. So I'm going to take care of this negative sign first, make that a negative 3. I like to put parentheses around these because I know those have to group together. So that helps me know they have to stay together. So when I'm looking for my lowest common denominator, I need all my different factors. And it looks like to me the only two factors I have are an x plus 5 and a x minus 1. So my denominators both need to have x plus 5 and x minus 1. So this side is missing x minus 1. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom by x minus 1. This piece is missing x plus 5. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom by x plus 5. All right, so now we're going to go 2x times x. I'm going to do the distributive property here. So 2x squared minus 2x, and that's over x minus 1, x plus 5. Okay, now I'm going to do the other piece, plus, and now I'm going to do the distributive property again. So negative 3x minus 15 over x minus 1, x plus 5. Okay, so like I said, some of you are going to be able to skip this middle step and go straight to the answer, and that's okay. Write down as many steps as you need to keep track of your work and know what's going on. So x minus 1 times x plus 5 is my common denominator. 2x squared minus 2x and negative 3x is negative 5x, and then minus 15. Okay, you need to take a closer look at your quadratic, 2x squared minus 5x minus 15. If it will factor into something that will reduce with the bottom, then you need to factor it. If not, then you're done. So I'm not so sure that this one is going to factor. It's even factorable because you could do 3 and 5, but I don't think there's a way with your 2 and 1 to get a difference of 5 in the middle. We could get 8. So this one doesn't factor anyway, so it doesn't matter. But if it did and it was going to reduce, then I would want to factor it. But since it doesn't, we're done. Okay, so now I see x plus 6x plus 4 over x minus 1 and 5 over x squared minus 1. So once again, I like to put these groupings like this. But I'm noticing something about x squared minus 1. That's our difference of squares. We need to factor that. We don't leave it x plus 1 and x minus 1. When you're trying to find the lowest common denominator, you want everything to be in its factored form. Okay? So x squared minus 1 is not in its factored form. All right, so what are we going to need to make the two denominators look the same? Well, I'm going to need a factor of an x minus 1 and a factor of an x plus 1. If I multiply this one by x plus 1, they now look the same. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. X times 6x is 6x squared. X times 4 is 4x. 1 times 6x is 6x. And 1 times 4 is 4. Plus my 5. And that's all over. So I kind of skipped a step, guys. I'm writing it now as x plus 1 over x minus 1. That's my common denominator. So my final answer is going to look like 6x squared, combining all my like terms, plus 10x plus 9 over x plus 1 and x minus 1. And we'll go ahead and leave it like that. All right. The next one. So let's go ahead and fix our couple of things first. So first of all, I see this negative sign, so I'm going to take care of that. Fix that. I'm going to put my parentheses around my x plus 3, my x minus 2, because I like to see them in their parenthesis factored form. And then x squared plus x minus 6, I'm going to factor that to x plus 3 and x minus 2. Okay? So now we need to figure out what our lowest common denominator is. So we need all of our different factors. So it looks like to me this just sets of parentheses. So I see an x plus 3, so I need an x plus 3, and I see an x minus 2, so I need an x minus 2. So all of the denominators need to be x plus 3 times x minus 2. So this one needs to multiply by x minus 2. Okay, I'm going to put that in parentheses. Remember how we did that before? And this one needs to multiply by x plus 3. And the 4 is good. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. 2 times x is 2x. 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. And the next statement would be negative x times x is negative x squared. Negative x times 3 is negative 3x. 1 times x is x. And 1 times 3 is 3. And then on the end, we have the plus 4 all over our common denominator, our lowest common denominator, 3x plus x plus 3 and x minus 2. Okay, let's combine all our like terms. And we end up with a negative x squared. 2x and a negative 3x is negative 1x plus x, so that's 0. And then negative 4 and positive 4 is 0, so that leaves us with plus 3 over x plus 3 and x minus 2. Okay, number 10. This one seems to be the hardest one right here to get the lowest common denominator. So let's kind of work through it and see what we can come up with. So first of all, let's factor the term over here on the right. So I'm going to take out a 3x, and that's going to leave me with x plus 1. Okay, so remember my statement. I always like to look at the numbers, just the numbers by themselves first. So I try to think if I only had a 9 and a 3, what would be the lowest common denominator between a 9 and a 3? Well, that would be a 9. Then I move to just the single variables. This one is an x squared, and this one is an x. So the lowest common denominator between those two would have to be an x squared, because remember, they have to look the same. So I'd have to multiply the one on the right by an x to make it an x squared. So I need an x squared. And then I need that last piece of x plus 1, all those different factors. So there's your lowest common denominator, guys. You want everything to be 9x squared times x plus 1. That's what you want the denominator to be. So let me rewrite this. All right. So we want it to be 9x squared times x plus 1. So if I look over here on the left, I already have the 9x squared. I'm just missing the x plus 1 piece. Okay, over here on the right, it looks like I got 3x times x plus 1. So the x plus 1s are matching up. To get a 9, I would have to multiply by 3. And to get an x squared, I would have to multiply by x. So I'm going to have to multiply that by 3x. Okay, so distributive property here, we're going to have 7x plus 7 plus x times 3x is 3x squared over my lowest common denominator, 9x squared times x plus 1. And that gives us 3x squared plus 7x plus 7 over 9x squared times x plus 1. So there we go. When we combine our like terms, that's what we end up with. Okay, this next one, it looks like I've got x squared plus 4x plus 4 on the bottom and x squared minus 4. So first of all, we want to get it in its factored form. And then x plus 2 and x minus 2. Okay, so notice this x plus 2, they're the same. So this is going to be x plus 2 quantity squared. Okay, so I'm going to come down here and write this so we can compare it a little bit better. So x plus 2 quantity squared plus 6 over x plus 2 and x minus 2. Okay, so we need to figure out what our lowest common denominator is. So there aren't any numbers or single variables. It looks like everything's a parenthesis. So let's look at our parentheses. On the left, I've got an x plus 2 quantity squared, and on the right, I've got an x plus 2. So you know you're going to have to use an x plus 2. You got to use that factor. You can see it in your problem. You have to have that as part of your denominator. Well, do you need that to be quantity squared or just x plus 2? You end up taking, when you have higher powers, guys, you end up taking the higher power because the only way to make them look the same is by multiplying. So you'd have to multiply the right by an x plus 2 in order to make it look the same as the left. Okay, and then what other parenthesis do we see? We see an x minus 2, so we need that factor also. So there's your lowest common denominator. We need our denominator to look like that. So it looks like to me the one on the left is missing the x minus 2 piece. I'm going to put that in parentheses. And the one on the right has an x plus 2 and an x minus 2, but it doesn't have 2x plus 2, so we're going to have to multiply that one by x plus 2. Okay. So now we'll go ahead and multiply that all out. X squared plus x minus 2x minus 2 plus 6x plus 12 over our lowest common denominator. Okay. And then let's start combining our like terms. So x squared, and then a positive x and a negative 2x, so that's a negative x, and a plus 6, so that's plus 5x, and then a negative 2 and 12 is plus 10 over, as our common denominator there. So x squared plus 5x plus 10 divided by x plus 2 quantity squared times x minus 2. Okay, we're done. So the best way to do this, guys, is just practicing over and over again, trying to get the lowest common denominator. I feel like that's going to be the hardest part of the assignment. The rest of it's just algebra, distributive property, combining like terms. But being able to identify the lowest common denominator is going to be the hardest part. So if you need to come up with a system, like I said, my system is I always check the numbers first. Then I do variables by themselves, just plain old variables, and then I look at parentheses. That kind of helps me figure out what I'm going to need for my common denominator. Okay, we're done.